some nights, a single sound can rewrite your fate. That night, it was the creak of the floor outside my door. Slow, uneven, too familiar. Every vibration in the wood echoed through my chest. Even the clock on the wall seemed afraid to tick too loud. I held my breath. The silence in our house was never peace. It was a warning. It meant he was awake. Under the sink, hidden behind old bottles and rags, was my secret. A flip phone with a cracked screen. A relic I'd refused to throw away. I kept it there for one reason. One person. The man who once told me, "If you ever send the code, I'll come." My palms were slick. Every nerve in my hand screamed at me to stay still. But something stronger moved first. That small, stubborn spark that had survived every long night before this one. 3 digits. Pause. 2 more. Our code. A message no one else would ever understand. I sent it. Then, nothing. No sound. Just the slow, deafening rhythm of my own heartbeat. Seconds stretched. I thought about all the nights I'd hoped for rescue, and all the mornings I'd woken up still tracked. Maybe I was a fool for believing this could be different. Maybe no one was coming. And then, a hum in the distance. Engines. Not the soft roll of a neighbor's truck, but a coordinated growl, mechanical and sure. Headlights swept across the curtains. A voice barked through the dark, sharp, commanding. "Unit entry!" "Go, go, go!" The house erupted in light and motion. Orders, footsteps, the sound of doors giving way. For a second, I couldn't move. Not from fear, from disbelief. Because the same steps that used to terrify me now carried something different. Freedom. If you've never been saved before, you can't know the sound it makes. It's not loud. It's precise. A rhythm that cuts through the years of silence and says, "You made it." That night, I learned that miracles don't always fall from heaven. Sometimes they answer a code you built yourself. Before the headlights, before the rescue, there were years of quiet that felt like a lifetime. People think silence is nothing. It isn't. In our house, silence had weight. It pressed on the walls, filled the gaps between words, lived in the space where love should have been. Every morning started the same way. His boots on the porch, the scrape of the door, the pause before he spoke. If that pause was long, I knew to stay invisible. If it was short, I knew something or someone would break before dinner. I learned the rules early. Don't speak first. Don't ask twice. Don't make noise you can't undo. At school, people thought I was shy. Teachers praised me for being quiet, polite, easy. I smiled when they said it. They didn't know silence wasn't a choice. It was survival rehearsed. When friends asked why I never came over to their houses, I said, "My stepdad's strict." No one ever asked twice. They were polite, too. Sometimes, when the classroom was loud with laughter, I'd drift away into the hum of voices and think, this is what freedom must sound like. My mother tried to protect me in her own way, quietly, desperately. When I forgot to wash a dish or spoke too fast, she'd move between us, her hands trembling as she offered to fix it herself. "Don't be mad," she'd say, voice low, eyes pleading. He'd sigh, make a show of forgiving her, then leave the room just long enough for both of us to exhale. It was love disguised as damage control, a kind of rescue that never reached the finish line. When I was 13, I started writing things down. Not full sentences, just words, dates, times, moods. A secret record in the back of an old school notebook. It wasn't rebellion, it was proof. Every word I wrote was a way of saying, I saw this, it happened, I existed. I hid the notebook under a loose floorboard in my room. Sometimes just knowing it was there made me feel like I had a witness. I used to promise myself I'd leave when I turned 18. I'd pack one bag, take the locket Aunt Caroline left me, and disappear into a world that didn't whisper. But freedom always felt like a place for other people. Every time I started to believe I could escape, he'd find a new way to remind me how small my world was. "Who'd take you?" he'd ask, smiling. "You wouldn't last a week." For a while, I believed him. It's easy to when every window in your life is nailed shut. But something changed the year my cousin Daniel came home on leave from the army. He looked at me, not with pity, but with recognition. Like he saw a person, not a problem. He asked questions other people avoided. He listened to the silence and didn't look away. Before he left, he gave me an old flip phone. "Emergency only," he said. I nodded, but something in his tone told me it wasn't just about danger. It was about choice. That phone became my secret rebellion, a piece of the world he couldn't touch. It stayed hidden for years, waiting, like a seed under frozen ground. And the first sound I ever made that truly mattered was the signal I sent that night. The phone looked like junk, scratched plastic, skin of dust, a crack that split the screen like a fault line. I kept it wrapped in an old washcloth, buried under the sink behind cleaner bottles that burned my nose even when closed. Most nights, I pretended to forget it was there. Forgetting made the hours pass. Daniel never pushed. When he called from bases I couldn't name, his voice stayed steady through patches of static. He asked about the weather more than anything else. Cold there meant, is he home? Storm coming meant, do I need to worry tonight? I learned to answer without answers. Skies are clear, I'd say, even when they weren't. Language became a rope we threw to each other in the dark. I had questions I didn't know how to ask. What makes a person ready? How do you pick a moment when every moment feels wrong? He once said, "You don't wait for courage, you train it." That line stayed with me like a lyric I couldn't stop humming. I started training mine quietly, by noticing patterns I'd spent years pretending not to see. I timed the house. The porch light took half a second to warm, a ghostly blink before it steadied. The hall bulb flickered if the switch wasn't pushed all the way up. The floorboard 2 steps from the bathroom door sang under any weight, even mine. I cataloged small mechanics the way other people memorize birthdays. If control was his religion, then knowledge would be mine. At night, when the air felt like it had weight, I'd hold the locket Aunt Caroline had left me and imagine a different door, a different room, a different kind of silence. Not the silence that punished, but the kind that healed. The phone was the only object in the house that seemed to point toward that future. It didn't promise safety. It promised a choice. The day we made the code, the sky was clear enough to make the world look simple. It wasn't. I called Daniel from a payphone outside the small grocery on the edge of town. The glass booth smelled like old pennies and lemon cleaner. I watched the road while I spoke, counting passing trucks the way I used to count breaths. "We need something short," he said. "Short survives panic." We tried words first. Words are a trap. They stick in your throat when you need them most. We moved to numbers. Numbers don't argue, they just arrive. 3 digits. Pause. 2 more. No meaning anyone else would hear. A rhythm you could tap with a thumb while hiding a tremor. He tested me. Close your eyes, he said. Find the sequence without looking. I could. The plastic keys felt like landings on a staircase I'd run 100 times in my mind. If you ever send it, he added, don't run to the door. Doors are for people who trust what's on the other side. Find a hard wall. Breathe small. Stay conscious. We come to you. Why me? I asked, surprising myself. I meant, why help me? He didn't miss the point. Because you told the truth before anyone believed it, he said. That's the hardest part. I hung up with my pulse too loud, the kind of loud that turns your body into a bell. For the first time, fear didn't feel like ownership. It felt like fuel. I wrote the sequence in my head until it lived there the way my name did. Not carved, not inked, grown. I never wrote it on paper. Some things can't survive being seen. Training courage looks nothing like the movies. It's not sweat and shouting and a sunrise. It's repetition in a quiet room with a door you don't trust. I practiced in 3-minute windows, when he took out the trash, when he walked to the mailbox, when he showered with the radio turned up too loud. I'd kneel on the bathroom mat, pull the phone from the washcloth, and rehearse what my hands would do when my mind refused to help. I learned the weight of the battery, the way the back cover snapped into place with a tiny click you could hide with a cough. I tried the sequence until my thumb could do it blind, then tried it again with my weaker hand. I timed the porch lights warm-up, imagined headlights crossing the window, mapped where I would sit to keep myself from sliding to the floor if I got dizzy. Preparation wasn't hope. It was discipline. Hope alone had never kept me safe. I made rules for myself, plain ones that didn't care how scared I was. If it's a bad night, but not the worst night, don't send it. A false alarm might cost the real one. If I send it, I don't speak unless spoken to by rescuers. Words cost air. After sending, I count breaths. Breaths keep you in the room. I also made fail-safes. The transistor radio in the kitchen set to a station with late-night news, not music. Voices keep you tethered. A small bottle of water under the vanity. Swallowing hurts less than gasping. A folded towel against the baseboard, to brace my back and slow a fall. These were ordinary items. Ordinary is what saves you when nothing else can. I didn't tell my mother. Not because I didn't want to, because secrets split people into before and after, and I wasn't sure which mother I'd get if I crossed that line. Every now and then, she'd leave a cup of tea outside my door and walk away before I opened it. I drank it after it cooled, so the steam wouldn't carry a smell he could question. Love sometimes has to be quiet to survive. The first time I almost used the code, the moon was thin, the kind of slice that doesn't light anything properly. The house was tired. So was I. A picture fell in the hallway, frame shattering into a stutter of glass no one swept for 2 days. Silence settled over the shards like a sheet. I stepped around them, memorizing the pattern they made on the floor. That night, footsteps stopped outside the bathroom. The shadow under the door was a line laid flat, unmoving. I could hear breathing, too close, too slow. My hand found the phone, warm from being near the pipes. I slid the battery in. The screen woke like an eye. 3 digits. Pause. 2 more. My thumb hovered over the last key. The difference between almost and always is thinner than paper. I pictured sirens lighting the wallpaper, neighbors gathering. The front lawn turned into a stage I hadn't chosen. I pictured my mother on the porch, barefoot in the cold. I pictured the morning after and the way people say, "We didn't know," when they mean, "We didn't look." I backed off the code and backed into breath. Inhale 4, hold, exhale 6. I put the battery back in the washcloth and tucked the phone away. Not tonight, I thought. Not because I was brave, because courage also knows when a choice is almost right, but not yet. I slept in my clothes, sitting up against the wall, counting ceiling cracks until morning. Sometimes restraint is a rehearsal too. In the mirror at dawn, I looked like I hadn't slept. I hadn't, but there was a steadiness at the center of my eyes I'd never seen before. Not confidence, readiness. We refined the plan over calls that didn't sound like plans. "If a house creaks too loud, what do?" Daniel asked one afternoon. "Move your weight," I said. "Don't freeze." "The wood remembers kindness." He laughed softly. "You'd make a good instructor." It felt like he handed me a rank I hadn't earned, and yet it fit. He made me promise 3 things. First, don't warn anyone except me. Warnings bend the future and break timing. Second, don't perform for neighbors. Rescue isn't spectacle. Third, if you get the chance to move towards safer space, you move. Pride doesn't get a say. We practiced questions he or his team would ask if they reached me while I was disoriented. Name? Are you hurt? Where are you in the house? I taught myself to answer in 1 sentence each. Conversations take time. Time is the first cost of panic. I also made a list of what I'd carry if rescue ever became tomorrow. The locket, the journal pages, a spare shirt rolled small, the key to a storage box at the bus station 2 towns over. I put the key inside a bandage tin. He would never open something that looked like pain. On a call that crackled so much I could barely hear him, Daniel said, "If we come fast. Your job is to stay alive long enough to hear it." I said I understood, then folded the words and put them somewhere inside my chest, where they wouldn't wear out from being reread. The last piece of the plan wasn't something I could touch. It was permission. I had to give it to myself, because no one else could. Permission to be done with surviving as a destination. Permission to treat rescue as a beginning, not an end. The moment I said yes to that, the house didn't look bigger anymore. It looked mapped. From then on, every ordinary task, washing a dish, making the bed, turning off a light, felt like practice for one extraordinary act. The code lived in my fingers. The decision lived in my mouth as breath. The future waited like a held note you decide when to release. When the night finally came, it felt strangely familiar. Not because I'd predicted every step, because I had chosen one. Catalyst is supposed to be a spark. Mine was a calendar. I noticed it by accident. The week Gerald started a new shift meant longer evenings, more liquor, heavier footsteps. It also meant longer windows of isolation. I took nothing for granted. I charged the phone with a small solar charger I kept hidden under the back porch. One afternoon of winter sun gave me enough. I tested the vibrate function twice and almost fainted from the sound in my own hand. I hated that fear could make a heartbeat seem like a siren. I did it again until it didn't. I moved the washcloth to the edge of the cabinet for speed. I practiced sitting on the floor with my back braced so I wouldn't slide if my legs went numb. I filled and capped the little water bottle. I placed the locket where I could feel it through my shirt without having to look. These were not charms, they were anchors. I wrote a list of 1-sentence truths I could recite if my mind tried to lie to me. I am not alone. Help exists outside this house. A code is a voice. Fear is not a reason, it's a weather report. Rescue is loud because safety is allowed to be. I read them once, then burned the paper outside, watching ash lift like small dark birds. No evidence to be found. But the sentences stayed. That's what words do when you finally speak them for yourself. They live in you like rooms you can enter without turning a key. The night that would become the night began with rain that didn't want to decide what it was. Mist, drizzle, then a sudden drum. The porch light blinked before holding. A vehicle passed slowly, then another. Somewhere a dog barked and no one answered. The house inhaled and held. I placed my palms flat on the tile to cool them. Inside my left cuff, taped so flat it wouldn't catch, was a strip of paper with 3 words. Send, stay, breathe. I didn't need to read it. Touching it was enough to remember. I listened for the patterns I knew. The coat rustled in the hallway. The sink dripped 3 times and stopped. The clock swallowed a second like it didn't want to be noticed. I wasn't looking for danger. Danger was a given. I was listening for my moment inside it. When it came, it didn't announce itself. Most moments don't. It arrived as clarity, a thin line drawn across the fog. Now. The plan didn't carry me. I carried the plan. I reached into the cabinet, found the washcloth by feel, and woke the phone with my thumb. 3 digits. Pause. 2 more. Send. The screen blinked once and went still. Silence pressed against my ears. I counted breaths. 1 to 4. Hold. 1 to 6. Somewhere in that counting, the house shifted from being a place where endings happened to being a place where something else could begin. I pressed my back to the wall and anchored my feet, ready to stay, ready to hear. What came next belongs to the climax, but the catalyst wasn't the engines, or the spotlight that cut through the curtains, or the orders that flew down the hall like lines I'd waited my whole life to hear. The catalyst was smaller than that. It was the moment I decided my voice could exist as a pattern of numbers, and that this, too, was a kind of speaking. I didn't know if anyone would call it brave. I didn't need them to. I only needed it to work. And it did. I used to think escape was a single act, a door breaking open, a hand pulling you into light. But freedom starts much earlier. It starts in secret, inside the small rehearsals no one sees. The first time I tried to turn on the phone, my hands were slick with fear. The battery slipped, hit the tile, and the sound cracked the air like lightning. I froze. The old clock in the hall ticked so loudly, it felt like an alarm. When I finally moved, I put the phone back under the sink, the same way you might hide a body. The second time, I pressed the wrong sequence. One wrong digit that could have summoned help too early. The thought of Daniel's team showing up while he was still awake almost made me vomit. I erased everything, held the phone to my chest, and waited until my heartbeat slowed enough to feel human again. The third time, I almost sent it. He was out there in the hallway. I could hear his steps, slow, uneven. The kind of walk that comes before something breaks. My thumb hovered over send, trembling, not from fear but from calculation. If they came now, what would happen to her? My mother. Would she scream? Would she freeze? Would she beg me to stop like she always did? I closed the phone, tucked it back, and waited for the storm to pass. Surviving one more night didn't feel like losing anymore. It felt like strategy. Daniel had once said, "Courage is useless without a system." So I built one, quietly, layer by layer. The porch light became a code. 2 flickers meant he's downstairs. 1 long glow meant he's close. The kitchen radio carried its own rhythm, news for safety, music for danger. I could listen from the next room and know what kind of night it would be. We never spoke of rescue, we spoke in weather. Clouds building, a single dot in reply. Sometimes that was all I needed, a pulse out there in the dark that matched mine. I started mapping the house like a soldier memorizing terrain. 17 steps to the door, 4 to the window, 2 to the bathroom where the signal waited. I walked those paths in the dark until the walls felt like extensions of my body. Sometimes the lock stuck, sometimes the light glitched. Once the phone refused to turn on at all. I cupped it in my hands, whispering warmth into it like it was alive. The house was a machine with bad wiring, and I was learning how to move inside it without triggering alarms. But the plan couldn't end with escape. It had to survive the aftermath. If they burst in, what then? I pictured my mother, barefoot, dazed. I laid a blanket over the chair near the wall where she could sit once the noise was over. I slipped a note into the spine of an old cookbook. Hotline numbers, an address Daniel trusted, a single word she'd understand. Marigold. I packed a bag. Identification, clean clothes, a copy of Aunt Caroline's locket photo. Nothing sentimental. You can't carry memory, you can only become it. Some nights, I thought about stopping. Maybe endurance was enough. Maybe there was a kind of victory in simply staying alive. But every time that thought came, Daniel's voice cut through it. Calm, exact. Count breaths, not footsteps. So I did. Until my fear had a pattern. Until even panic could be measured. One night, I looked at my reflection in the window. My face looked older. My eyes looked awake. That was when I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. I was rehearsing. Escape wasn't going to be desperate. It would be precise. When I closed my journal, I wrote 4 words at the bottom. Send. Stay. Breathe. Live. Then I slid it back into the cookbook, washed my hands, and started making dinner. He was still in the other room, laughing. That deep, fake laugh that used to fill every corner of the house. But that night, it sounded different. It sounded small. It sounded temporary, and as I moved through the kitchen, the rhythm of my own breath steady and sure. One thought came clear and cold as truth itself. When the plan finally lives in your hands, you're not a prisoner anymore. You're the one holding the key. That night, the air felt wrong, too still, too clear. Storms have a silence before they start. Houses do too. He'd been drinking, the way he always did when the world hadn't given him enough to destroy. His laughter rolled down the hallway like a threat, pretending to be joy. The radio in the kitchen was still playing. Static, then music. Danger. I turned it off. Slowly. The floor creaked as I stepped backward toward the bathroom. Every sound was a test. The mirror caught the flicker of the porch light, a long, accidental glow. I froze. Then I realized it wasn't accidental. The bulb had burned too low to stay steady. It was now or never. He shouted my name. His voice filled the house, heavy as footsteps. I moved faster. The cracked phone was already in my hand, cold against my skin. My thumb hovered over the familiar pattern. 3, pause, 2. I whispered to myself, send, stay, breathe, live, and pressed. The phone blinked once, a dying light, and the world exhaled. Through the thin door, I could hear him coming closer, his steps uneven, his breath thick. You hiding again? He said, voice slurred. Still weak? His hand hit the door. Once, twice. The sound shook the mirror. Something inside me went still. For the first time, I didn't back away. I'm not hiding, I whispered. He pushed the door open. The light caught his face, twisted in rage. And then, outside, another sound rose like thunder. Engines, tires on gravel, voices through radios. A flash of white light tore through the window. Unit entry! Go, go, go! The door to the house burst open. Shouts collided with confusion. Boots, commands, the sharp edge of discipline meeting chaos. He spun toward the noise, still shouting, still trying to make his voice matter in a house that no longer listened. I stayed where I was, back to the wall, phone in hand, breath slow and measured. The plan was alive. Through the bathroom crack, I saw them move. Black uniforms, laser sights slicing through the dark like lines of pure certainty. And then Daniel's voice, clear, steady, cut through everything. Step away from her. For a second, the world held its breath. He turned, tried to speak, but the words didn't matter anymore. Hands seized him, the floor shook. The mirror rattled once more, and then it was over. Outside, the porch flooded with light. Neighbors had gathered, their faces pale, confused, recording what they couldn't understand. The same porch where silence had ruled now echoed with radios, with life, with truth finally loud enough to be heard. Daniel appeared in the doorway, helmet off, eyes scanning until they found mine. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he nodded, not like a soldier to a survivor, but like one fighter acknowledging another. He reached out his hand. I stood, legs shaking but steady, and placed the cracked phone in his palm. It still carried the warmth of my skin. "That's your signal?" he asked quietly. I nodded. He smiled, just once. Good call. Behind him, I could see my mother at the edge of the yard, barefoot, the blanket from the chair wrapped around her shoulders. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. For a moment, I didn't know if I should go to her. Then she whispered something I hadn't heard from her in years. "I'm sorry." The words trembled, but they existed. That was enough. I stepped past Daniel, out into the night air. It was cold, alive, filled with motion. Lights flashing, radios humming, gravel crunching under boots. I clutched Aunt Caroline's locket at my throat, the metal warm now from the heat of my skin. For years, it had been a promise. Tonight, it had become proof. I looked up at the porch light, still flickering. This time, I didn't see it as a warning. It looked like a heartbeat. And for the first time in my life, the noise that filled my house wasn't his. It was mine. It was freedom, arriving right on schedule. The house looked smaller the next morning. Police tape shimmered in the wind like an afterthought, and the porch light, the same one that had once been my signal, blinked weakly against the pale sky. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Fear had been replaced by something quieter. Exhaustion. Relief. Grief Maybe. But it was clean, like air after rain. Daniel sat beside me on the hood of his truck, his uniform jacket draped around my shoulders. The cracked phone lay between us. It looked ridiculous, too small to have carried that much hope. "You did everything right," he said. I didn't answer. There wasn't a word for what right felt like. Inside, my mother was giving her statement. The words must have hurt. Truth always does when you've swallowed it too long. I hoped she'd find her own way to heal. Maybe not with me, maybe not soon, but someday. A counselor from the crisis unit asked if I wanted to call anyone. I shook my head. My circle was already here, the few people who had heard my silence and decided it was worth decoding. They drove me to a small military base on the edge of town for the night. It smelled of coffee and metal, like Daniel's old stories. The next morning, I woke up to a folded note on the table. "You're safe, but don't mistake safety for stillness. Healing is work too." He'd signed it simply, D. Months passed in slow motion. Therapy sessions, court hearings, paperwork, the unglamorous architecture of recovery. I learned the strange new rhythm of living without fear, how to sleep through silence without waiting for footsteps, how to look at a door and see nothing behind it. There were good days, like the first time I laughed without checking who heard, and bad ones, when memories arrived uninvited, smelling of bleach and rain. But even then, I kept breathing through them. 4 counts in, 6 counts out. Some habits are worth keeping. 1 year later, I started volunteering at a community center that helped survivors of abuse. At first, I stayed in the background, sorting files, making tea, listening. But slowly, stories started finding me. A teenage girl came in one afternoon, trembling, her sleeve pulled too low. She didn't want to talk, not really. She just wanted to sit. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "How do you stop feeling afraid all the time?" I thought about lying, saying it goes away. Instead, I told her the truth. "You don't," I said softly. "You just learn to move even while you're afraid." She glanced at the locket around my neck, the one from Aunt Caroline. "It's pretty," she said. "It's a promise," I told her. "It reminds me that some promises outlive the people who made them." Her eyes lingered on the locket, then met mine. Something passed between us, recognition, maybe. The quiet understanding of those who've had to rebuild themselves. As she left, I looked down at the cracked phone on my desk, the same one I'd once hidden under the sink. The screen was dark now, permanently dead. But I kept it there anyway, not as a relic, but as proof. Proof that silence can be broken. Proof that help can hear even what's not spoken. Outside, the sun caught on the windows of the center, filling the room with a warm, colorless light. For years, I had feared the sound of footsteps. Now I listened for them. Each pair entering the center meaning someone else had found their courage. I reached for my locket and whispered a single sentence to the empty room. I survived the night that taught me how to live. And for the first time, the quiet didn't feel like danger. It felt like peace. Sometimes, survival begins with one message and a voice that finally answers. If her courage moved you, subscribe for more stories that remind us, even in silence, someone is always listening.